Hi, AP Research, Mr. Muller here, and in today's video, we're talking about the definitions, assumptions, and hypotheses that need to be noted in research papers in order for you to properly contextualize and to have a professional introduction to a research paper. Now, I really want to tell you why we're focusing on things like definitions, assumptions, and hypotheses. Definitions are integral to your introduction, and assumptions and hypotheses are integral to the presentation that you will be doing in April. All right, hope you're excited. I'm excited. Let's get started. Now, definitions, assumptions, and hypotheses are all going to be in the introduction section of a research paper. Now, that introduction could end up being 10 pages long by the time we get to all of the components before you actually start your methodology. However, in that section are going to be your definitions as well as any assumptions or hypotheses you're going to anticipate. Now, let's talk about definitions themselves. Typically, the definitions section in a research paper comes after a general introduction, introducing your topic and why it's significant. We get a little bit more into this when we talk about lit reviews. But you are going to place your definitions wherever your discipline's research papers typically go. So look at your research papers, find typically where they put their definitions in, that's what you'll choose. The question when it comes to a definition section is, what do you actually need to define? And the simple answer is, you are going to define terms from your research question, especially if it's proper scope, that are central to your study. So things like the focus topic itself. For instance, if I was looking at to what extent self-assessment practices in a 10th grade high school classroom in an international school affect X, I need to define self-assessment, it's my focus term. You need to define what maybe a high school student is or an international school is. You need to, again, focus on all those terms central to the research question, things that are not common knowledge. They need to be defined. Now, what am I looking for in a definition section? Two things. First, does the definition come from your foundational research? Does it come from research itself? Do not, under any circumstances, cite the dictionary for definitions to your terms. If you're in psychology and you're looking at a specific psychological term, use the actual psychology has a book of definitions for their discipline. Use that. Find the foundational source for your topic and use their discipline. That's where you will get the definitions from. Now, it doesn't have to be every definition, because the second thing I look for is, are you using more than one source to provide a definition for your terms? Now, if you're using things like high school students or international school, well, that's going to be easy to do and you just need one source for that. However, if you're using a specific term to your discipline, you need more than one source because you need a holistic definition. If you're using, let's say, a foundational source, well, okay, that's a definition from maybe 30 years ago, but as research has evolved, that definition probably has been expanded. So I need more than one source to fully understand what that term means. Those are the two things I look for in terms of a definition section. Also, you have to acknowledge any possible hypotheses, especially if you're in a science discipline, or possible assumptions. Now, they don't necessarily need to be in a research paper, and when you read research papers, you won't necessarily find them unless perhaps a science discipline for hypotheses. But if you're looking at the presentation on oral defense rubric that you're going to be assessed on in April, the third row of that rubric is a reflection section. And the difference between getting a medium, or a 3, and a high, which would be a 5, is, do you understand, when you talk about here's the data I got back and here are the conclusions that I have based on my research and answering my research question, have you been able to tie that back to initial assumptions or hypotheses that you had before you began this research? You're going to be assessed in your presentation on if you've been reflective of that. Now, we're going to be doing an activity at the beginning of class that talks about why you need to acknowledge possible assumptions and think about assumptions as you are writing a research paper and as you're conducting your research. But a little bit of a spoiler, because I don't want to give too much away, the reason we think about assumptions is we want to make sure that the reader and you as the writer are on the same page. You don't want to assume anything about your readers, and your writers don't want to assume anything about the research. Great research, and this is important, great research can be absolutely replicated with the same results. If I took your research and did it exactly the same way in that same environment, I should get the same results. And if you don't try to eliminate possible assumptions, it's going to be difficult to do that. Now, again, assumptions are basically a way of seeing. You're filling in gaps because there are gaps that exist in research. And again, we're going to be covering a do now that talks about this and why it's important, so just hold on to that idea. Now let's take a look at some assumptions and definitions in a poster presentation. Let's just take a look at this exemplar. To what extent are social relationships between selected high school students at the X School of Kuwait influenced by the beauty premium, and how does it impact the distribution of trust among students within their social relationships? So that's their research question. Let's talk about their assumptions. So within this examination of the beauty premium and social relationships at this school, what do we have to assume to make sure that we don't have any gaps in the research paper that we write? I assume the high school students in Kuwait have social relationships with each other. Okay. I assume that the beauty premium is applied the same way amongst all ages of high school students. Okay. I assume that high school students consider physical attractiveness when determining credibility. Okay. I assume that the beauty premium found in prior research is applicable to the environment in the School of Kuwait. And I assume that the participants have different standards of beauty. These are all things that I have to assume exist in order to do this research. It just shows that you've been reflective on this process. If I'm going to be doing this research, what am I assuming already exists? Because if you don't make those assumptions and it turns out you're wrong, you're going to have to be flexible in altering things. So it's just about being reflective before we do this research. In terms of definitions, if you notice, and I'm not going to read them all, and this was from a poster presentation at the beginning of our course. It wasn't done at the end of a research paper, but note that every definition that they're having in this research question is cited by specific research, and it's detailed and central to their research question. So every central important term in the research question is being accounted for here. This is what I am looking for within the first couple of months in terms of definitions. Now, your definitions are going to be expanded more when you do your lit review in November, but for poster presentations, this is going to be acceptable. We'll look at what these definitions look at in a lit review when we get to lit reviews later on in the course. So that's what I'm looking at. That's all we have for today. Hope you learned something you didn't learn before. Thanks for watching.